Starting.
All right. Gotcha.
All right. Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live on a Sunday evening. Hello, Matthew Fairburn. I'll let you fiddle around real quick and I'll properly tee us up here. Sabres getting ready to play Winnipeg tonight down at KeyBank Center. That's where Matthew Fairburn is. I'll do a formal introduction. Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. I'm Kris Baker. That's the Athletics' Matthew Fairburn. Before we begin, got to go through it as we always do. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like this video. Hit the notification bell so you know when Matthew and I go live. And you find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a 5-star review. And talk about how nice Matthew's sweater is in the comments. Matthew, I was watching Twitter while waiting for you to get situated. And it sounds like no lineup changes tonight. Is that indeed correct? Or do you want to dispute what Jordan LaBarber, Sabres Intrepid beat reporter, has put out on Twitter?
No, that is true. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is going to play on the second half of a back-to-back, and there will be no changes to the defense, which means Erik Johnson will be out. And Don Granato noted that the unique time of year plays into that, and I think the listeners of the show know that the trade deadline is on Friday, and we can all assume that's what Don Granato was referring to in terms of the unique time of year. I think Erik Johnson is probably at the top of the list of players the Sabres could trade away. Certainly given the movement on the defense market, with 2 right shot defensemen getting traded last week, that just bumped Erik Johnson up the list of available righties. So yeah, same lineup as last night. And why not? When you win 7-2, right, against the Golden Knights, stick with what worked. The only, I think, notable thing is that Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen gets to play the second half of a back-to-back, and the guy's been a workhorse lately.
He has been a workhorse, had a little bit of a lighter night against the Golden Knights, 22 saves on 24 shots. Maybe that partially plays into it. Granato, I noticed, did spread the Sabres ice time out fairly evenly last night as well. I think that they only had one forward. I think Greenway led the way for the forwards last night, a little over 18 minutes. Dylan Cousins, pair of shorthanded goals. And I think he only had like 12 and a half minutes of ice. I got to double check that, but I thought that was kind of interesting. The spread of the ice time last night. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm seeing 12:29 time on ice last night for Dylan Cousins with those 2 shorties, but a 3-point night for Skinner, a 3-point night for Owen Power. We'll see if the guys can keep it going. We didn't have a chance to kind of tee it up. Usually we meet for at least, 2-3 minutes to kind of talk about what we want to get to tonight. We have a compressed time anyway, so we can just kind of fly without a net, but you had a chance to talk to Kevin Adams last night before the game against the Lightning. For those that haven't checked out Matthew's story in The Athletic, I would encourage you to do so. It was kind of interesting. I'll let you kind of get into, what you want to. I don't want you to regurgitate what you had already written, but here, let me pass it back to you and just kind of high level. How did your conversation with Kevin go? Did you learn anything new? Because for me, reading your story, a lot of it sounded like a recap of the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. There was a lot of things that we've talked about that you kind of expected Kevin to say, but there's questions that you have to ask, right?
Yeah, it was enlightening in some ways. I thought just from a nuts and bolts standpoint, the thing I walked out of the room, learning, or something I didn't know going in, is that, he wants Don Granato to be the coach next year. And, that was the first, we've heard him voice his support, but there was zero hesitation when I asked the question. It was immediate that, yes, he envisions him being the coach next year, which I think was a legitimate question, right? We've talked about it quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Even as they've played a lot better, are these last 20-ish games the final audition? Are they part of the evaluation? But it sounds as if, that's a decision that has been made as far as Kevin is concerned. So, things can always change. I'm never going to sit here and say because he said it in March means there's no way Don Granato gets fired. But, I think it's pretty safe to say it won't happen, barring something completely unforeseen, like, a very, very lengthy losing streak or something crazy like that. So that was interesting. And I think there were some, in conversations like these, it's always interesting. I think there's, we were texting this morning about how the reactions to the conversation were kind of all over the map. And I said, hopefully that means I did a good job, or hopefully that means that Kevin, has, some decent answers that get people thinking. And there were some people that, thought there were spots that if it were a one subject interview, it would have been easy for me to push back on and drill down deeper with some follow-ups. But what I tried to do in the 20, 30 minutes we had was get to as many topics that people have been wondering about as possible, right? If that's his reasoning for supporting Don Granato, pushing back on that, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to do that down the line. My thought was, let's get on to another topic. And we hit on a lot of stuff. We hit on UPL. He's, already had conversations with his agent about how he feels about him, how he wants him as a part of the long-term picture. He's already, gotten in depth with the UFAs about what they want to do, which I think is important. I know, it's a business and he's got to do what's best for the team, but treating players like Erik Johnson, Kyle Okposo, Zemgus Girgensons right on their way out the door, making sure it's, what they want, I think is a big deal. And there was some other stuff philosophically on how he handles the deadline, what he thinks the team needs are, a lot of stuff that we can, double click on if you want, or if there's commenters that have specific questions. But those were kind of the high level takeaways that I had from the conversation.
It's kind of interesting in your story that you mentioned to Kevin that, coming into the season, it seemed like the Sabres were no longer on a lot of the teams' no trade lists, right? Like more players were telling their agents, hey, Buffalo's in play for me if the opportunity comes up. But yet Chris Tanev, I think, was one this week that said no, seemingly, to Buffalo, and maybe others are. Kevin alluded to that also, I think, in an answer that he gave you, right? Where he admitted that maybe they were in on some guys that said, no, I'd prefer to go elsewhere. It's kind of funny how that changes in season, right? Based on
Very
how the team
quickly,
performs. Right? Yeah.
And what I had heard last summer was that they were starting to come off some lists, right? And I think we know here that that's a slow process, right? They were coming off of some lists. They weren't off all of them. They probably weren't off most of them, frankly, but they were moving in the right direction. It feels as if that's gone the other way, given how they've played. And, I think that has stopped Kevin Adams from doing some things. I appreciated the honesty in that regard, that there are things he's tried to do, because that's a conversation we've had, right? How much criticism do we give a guy where we don't always know exactly what he's trying to get done and what's getting blocked? And I think he has to deal with that more than a lot of GMs probably have to deal with that, because even in the best of times, Buffalo is not a destination, right? Hockey players want to win first and foremost. Hockey players want to get paid. Buffalo can offer the money piece of it. They can offer the winning, but even when they can offer the winning, it's just not a destination market for a lot of, Florida, Vegas, Dallas, these places with low taxes, warm weather. California, you can play by the beach, you got the big markets, right? These big cities that guys like to flock to. Buffalo is a place that I think once you get here, you start to love it. But from the outside, it's hard to change that perception. And I think this season did some damage to the progress they were making in that regard. Yep. And it's part of why I say it's important to treat certain players right? Kyle Okposo, Erik Johnson, Alex Tuch, these guys that are veterans that have been around the league, that have sway with other players in the league. You want to make sure you're handling those situations properly, because you don't want word to spread on how you're treating players, because then you need to have something going for you, right? And I think they have treated players right over the last few years, and that's an important piece of this. But it's a undercurrent to the trade deadline for me, because if Kyle Okposo wants to leave, you owe it to him, right? He's given a lot to the organization. You owe it to him. Same with Girgensson, same with Erik Johnson. And I mentioned Tuch there, not because he's a trade deadline piece, but because you need to treat him right in terms of, not dragging this timeline out too long, right? He's in the prime of his career. He wants to win. He wants to drive the bus on a winner. And, he, I think, can be the biggest advocate for your team league-wide. Popular guy league-wide, right? He's, at a big agency. He's a guy that can help you start to change the perception. So I think that is, important when you think about those things over the next few days.
So Teddy has a comment up here. He says, when can players update their no trade lists? How often? It's all clauses in their contract, Teddy. So like I'll use Blake Coleman as an example. He signed a 6-year contract with Calgary ahead of the 2021-22 season. He has a no trade clause that, for the first 3 years that expires. Then he has a kind of a modified no trade clause that kicks in next year where he can provide a 10-team trade list. So it's all contractual. It's all different if the player has trade protection in their contract. The reason I was looking at Blake Coleman is because I think he'd be a hell of a player for the Sabres to go out and get, but it seems very unlikely that would be happening via trade unless he wants to come to Buffalo. Or if Buffalo makes it on his 10-team trade list. Now, whether or not when the player provides the list, that's always different also. Some have to do it before the season. Some can do it when asked. It all kind of changes. But just wanted to get to that. On Luukkonen, it's going to be really interesting. I don't think we've seen him play 2 in a row. I can't remember when the last time we saw Sabres goalie play consecutive days.
Levi last year.
Was it last year at the end of the year?
Yeah, he did it.
Well, I know. I know he did it at Northeastern basically every weekend. So he did it.
He did it at the end of. Yeah, one of those back-to-backs they had at the end of the year, they went with him while they were trying to make the push for the playoffs. But Luukkonen has not done it. You're right.
This will be kind of interesting, but I wrote down just, his growth this season into the player that he's become, and that has just been excellent. And like, it's so just amazing. Like getting goaltending figured out is massive for the organization. Levi's looking really good down in Rochester. If you can have both of those guys like a 2-headed monster moving forward, it just kind of settles everything down for them because they haven't had that luxury, if you think about it, in a while. I don't know. I'd have to go back through my mental Rolodex. I spent so much time in the prospect vortex, but I think since like Ryan Miller left, I can't really remember the position being settled. Yeah.
A couple days ago was 10 years since they traded Ryan Miller. So that's probably your answer. A decade is the last time. Now, it poses an interesting question, I think. Are you comfortable with Luukkonen and Levi going into next year as your 2 NHL goalies? I think you're comfortable with Luukkonen 100% at this point. I mean, again, unless something changes here in the last 6 weeks of the season, I think you're comfortable with that. Are you ready to go Levi back in the NHL, or would you rather pair Luukkonen with a veteran and give Levi a little more runway? I think that's the decision they have to make. I would lean right now towards it being Luukkonen and Levi, but it's a much better situation going Luukkonen and Levi this time around than it was last season because you now have the body of work with Luukkonen that suggests he is a legit starter. If he regresses, if he takes a step back, then you have a hungry Levi trying to take his job. Much different situation than essentially handing Levi the job like they did this season. So I think it creates an interesting dynamic heading into the offseason.
I think you can go into next season as of now thinking that I'm with you. I think it's going to be Luukkonen and Levi next season. We have all offseason to talk about it. We have still to see what Levi does down the stretch here with Rochester in a playoff run, but he's been excellent. I was looking at his last 9 starts over the last 3 weeks. Save percentage is over 93. I think he's got a 926 aggregate save percentage in the 15 starts that he's had in Rochester. And, he sees a lot of pucks. I mean, he's had, I think, over 35 shots faced, 7 of those 9 starts. You can tell I recorded an episode of Prospect Avenue a little bit ago, so they're all freshly imprinted in my mind. But he looks good down there, and he'll just look even better with a better defensive core in front of him next season in Buffalo. That's where I'm leaning. But Winnipeg coming into Buffalo tonight, I think they're 8-2 in their last 10. It's going to be a pretty tough out. I think, for the Sabres tonight. Hopefully, I wonder if that was strategic how Granato kind of spread the ice time out last night with his forwards. You had to think he had been thinking about that. I mean, that's kind of, they have to start thinking about that stuff. But no changes, although it was Cousins went back down the middle last game, right? With Benson and Peterka. What did you think of Cousins' game besides, I mean, we only saw him for 12 and a half minutes, but did you like what do you see with the move back to the middle with Cousins?
Yeah, I've liked Cousins generally over the last, handful of games, and he finally got some of the production to come along with it. The confidence was missing for a long stretch early in the season. And you do wonder, getting in that fight with Garnett Hathaway and, having to wear the shield and having the broken nose and whatever else came along with that, how long that lingered for him. He's now looking like the player he was last year. And it's just a reminder of how badly they need him and Tage Thompson to be what they signed up for, right? To be the guys they extended, because it's a different team when those guys are going. You need two centers that can drive your team the way that they do when they're at their best. So, yeah, Cousins coming along is definitely a huge bonus for this team. It's nice to, last night was interesting because we can get into Peyton Krebs a little bit too, and what that move for Cousins meant for him. It's all a domino effect, right? You move Cousins back to the middle. That means Casey Middlestat's bumped down a line. That means Krebs is back on the fourth line. But I give Krebs a lot of credit for he deserves to be higher. He got the opportunity, and he deserved to keep it based on the way that he played. But he goes back down and he just plays his game. He finds his role and had a really effective game, the last night and 2 nights in a row, I thought. So good on him for doing that. But it creates, I think, a bit of a decision, in terms of their center pool, what happens there, right? Because I don't think Krebs is really the ideal fourth line guy. I think ideally for him, he's higher in the lineup. And I think ideally for the team, you maybe have a different type with a little bit more, a little bit heavier, a little bit more reliable on faceoffs, and a little more experienced in that spot. So decisions need to be made.
Well, decisions need to be made. And let's go back to something that Kevin Adams, in an answer that he gave you yesterday, was talking about different types of players and player profiles and different elements that players maybe that are outside the organization could be brought in to fill. That almost leads me to believe, especially when you see a Peyton Krebs moving around. I mean, this is going to be an audition for him the rest of the season if he doesn't move at the deadline, which you never know, right? Surprises happen. But Krebs is one of those guys we talked about at the beginning of the season. Where does he fit? Where does Greenway fit? And those are guys, Greenway's played well, but I put him in that bucket too, frankly, still as a guy that if you're not going to have him, because he should be on your fourth line on a good team. I still feel that way. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Krebs. But yeah, I thought that, Kevin's answer there, he's admitting, I think, by saying that, yeah, we need more grit, tenacity, aggressiveness, willingness to get to the net, play a little bit of an uglier game. I think that's I'm reading between the lines, but that kind of
you know what he mentioned a couple of times is when I asked directly about needs and what the team needs on the ice, he mentioned the bottom six having an identity, having guys that fill certain roles. And, exactly what you're talking about and exactly what we've talked about is that you need guys with, you can't just fill 4 lines with skill, right? You can't just have your 12 best, most skilled forwards. You need guys that have defined roles and are willing to embrace those roles. I think Florida's an excellent example of this, of their fourth line is awesome, right? Those guys just bring it and they're physical and they play with an edge, but they very much have a role that they play to night in and night out that helps set the tone for the rest of the team. The Sabres, I feel like, have guys that are still figuring that out, that they got guys don't have defined roles. And if they do, they're not playing to them consistently enough. And I think Krebs is an example. He's a skilled guy playing fourth line center. He has the tenacity at times. He has some of the edge, but it doesn't feel like his natural identity, right? You saw a little bit of his natural identity in that 6-game audition he got playing between Peterka and Benson. It's like, oh yeah, that's the guy. That's the first round pick. That's the passer that everybody loves. So that's what they need, is these guys that are, guy doesn't have to be 32. He doesn't have to be a fighter. He doesn't have to have won a million Stanley Cups. Just guys that you go out and identify. Something Paul Maurice said this week I thought was interesting when he was asked about Gavrikov, their fourth liner there. He stopped himself when he said, we've gotten lucky with some of those additions. And he stopped himself and he said, well, it's not luck. Our pro scouts have done a good job. That's what Kevin Adams and the pro staff need to do, is find some of these undervalued guys that when you plug them in can play a very specific role and are, excited, willing, and able to do that. And that's where the whole situation with Krebs, to me, that's part of it. Is he a misfit on the fourth line? I think he's done fine on the fourth line. Just feels like you need a different profile there. And it would probably benefit Krebs, too, to be in a different situation in terms of who he's playing with.
Paul Maurice was talking about Jonah Gadjevich, right? Because
yes.
That's okay. No, I just wanted, and I'm not correcting you. I'm just saying it made me look, because that's a player. To his point, though, about the pro scouting. Now, keep in mind, I'm not claiming to be an NHL scout, okay? But I remember not liking Jonah Gadjevich when he played in Owen Sound, because I thought he was too slow. And he's still not a speed burner, but he's one of those guys that has kind of gritted his way through the ranks to find a role, and he plays it really well there in guarded minutes, and he's tough and he's big and he'll hit and he'll fight. You're right, though. I think that and Kevin's right too. Identity is needed across the board, but especially on those lunch pail guys. Florida, every single player in that lineup knows what they're getting when those three guys hop over the boards on their fourth line. It's a fact. And I know it goes back to that Ryan Whitney tweet answer when he said they need more guys. The Sabres need guys to drag the team into the fight. People see the word fight and they think they're talking about dropping the gloves and actually no, it's battling. It's the mentality. It's playing fearless, going hard, balls to the wall. It's not like, but sometimes, and you, out of that process, you do get in a fight here and there. And then,
absolutely,
and to that point, let's bring it back to Peyton Krebs. Peyton Krebs now likes to fight guy. But I don't know who else they have that does it besides Clifton on the back end, right? It's like,
and he's also, he likes to do it, but he's not very good at it, right? Like
no.
He's willing. He's willing, and I give him credit. He loves to stick up for his teammates. He loves to fire up the crowd with it. He's small. He's not a fighter. I don't think he'd ever fought before he got to the NHL. So it's like, that's not, again, it's just not him, right? And so I give Kevin Adams some credit for talking about that piece of their bottom six, because it will change, right? Kyle Okposo, I don't think will be back next year. I think there's a chance Zemgus Girgensons will not be back next year. I'll never rule it out. I mean, it's been here. He seems to find a way to keep surviving year after year. But I would say
those are the two logical places to start using those contract slots. I may have mentioned it the last time.
Yes.
Use those slots to get the elements that you sorely need.
Those
it's
spots,
that speed, it's that energy, it's that tenacity.
You don't have a lot of spots as it is because of everybody that's under contract. Those are two easy places to get some change, which could mix things up, right? Because maybe it's a third and a fourth line. Right now, those two guys are 2/3 of your fourth line. And so when you say that some identity needs to change, to me, those are two of the guys. And Kris, those two guys wearing letters, right?
I know. And I don't think that leadership's been, a really highly, it's not going to grade out well for me at the end of the year either, frankly.
How could it, right? I mean, you're talking about a 500 hockey team that was expecting to be in the playoffs that has these issues that we talk about. Consistency, 1 3-game winning streak to their credit all season. Competitiveness is brought up constantly. I think if you command F compete or competitiveness or, words thereof in that Q&A I had with Kevin Adams, it will pop up multiple times because he brought it up. And so, and he's brought that up throughout the season. in various interviews that he's given. So that's, I think, part of leadership. And that's where I think the Granato conversation is interesting, because he's part of that too, right? He's part of leadership and he's part of that big picture. But a lot of it happens on the ice and hasn't happened often enough. But you're seeing the last few weeks what it looks like when it does start to happen, because it's a guy you bring up a lot that can be a guy that'll have a letter on his chest at some point, is Dylan Cousins.
Yeah.
Because when he's going, he is dragging people into the fight by the
Damn
way
right.
that he plays, how fast he plays. That's why I do wonder when he got in that fight, how long that all kind of lingered for him. And it's also part of why you need the heavier third and fourth lines to make it so Dylan Cousins and Peyton Krebs and Alex Tuck don't need to be the guys that feel like this weird pressure to be like, I need to fight Garnett Hathaway tonight, or I need to stick up for the
kid,
guys.
Cousins, but I think that fight with Hathaway, it messed him up. it messed him up, I think, a little mentally, having that happen to him, and it kind of set him back a little bit. It's not just the fight, like the shield.
No, I'm talking like, I don't know, how.
Yeah.
I mean, you break your nose, that alone is going to impact your conditioning for a while, because you're not going to be breathing right. And the shiner he had, I mean, the shot he took, I don't know. He never said whether he had a concussion or not, but, I think it's fair to wonder, like you said, how did it impact, his head? Literally, how did it impact his head? But also then how does it impact his confidence? Is he a little more hesitant? He's like, is he thinking, maybe I'm not as tough as I think I am, right? Like all these things that now seem like a distant memory, but undoubtedly impacted him for a while. So I think him getting back to being who he is, I don't know if there's three more important players on the Sabres to the future than Dylan Cousins. I think he is your future number one center, personally. I think that's his ceiling if he hits it. Mm-hmm. And not only just that, but like we talk about, this guy that is going to be your tone setter and can score so much.
His fabric, Matt, is built for playoff hockey. His fabric, everything that he's always shown going back to junior when he was in Lethbridge, is a playoff hockey type of guy. You just got to get the team there to see it.
Yeah. And I almost don't want to use the word disappoint, but his production has been one of the biggest disappointments for this team, I think. And
Thompson and Cousins both. Yep.
Because of factors that are a little bit potentially outside of his control. I mean, he shouldn't have dropped the gloves there. That wasn't his control. But because of some stuff that went wrong for him, it doesn't change my opinion of who he can become as a player, and the fact that I think he's capable of being a 35-40 goal scoring type of player for you. And if he can unlock that, I think that's one of the most important factors to this team reaching that next level, because that's a guy I think that can change games with his speed and with the way that he plays and his shot that he's shown the last, couple of weeks. Now that he has some confidence again, it's a big deal that he gets right going into the offseason.
This season is not indicative of his drivetrain that he has. I think that's the best way to say it. I know it's going to be hard for some to, to get that and swallow that thought, but he's much better than he will be moving forward. Hey, let's go through the chat real quick. It's 6:25 ish and we like the chat. So let's get to some questions in the chat before you have to bounce. I might keep you a little into warmups if that's all right.
Totally fine. We know the lineup. So as long as the background music isn't too loud, then we can hang out for warmups.
It's fine as long as it's not like Casey and the Sunshine Band or something. Casey Sunshine Band. Spike says, Matthew, any indication on the status of the assistant coaches? This will be a topic that we will talk about a lot after the season. Thoughts on Spike's question?
No indication yet. And to your point, that felt like an off-season question. It felt like a question that Don Granato also needs to be asked, but it is a Kevin Adams question as well. So something that will certainly be worth revisiting once we hit the end of the season, and not a change that you're going to make at this point, right? So that feels like something that'll be part of the off-season evaluation, I think, for this group.
Kyle Okposo, assistant coach. Get ready for those words. Axel says, with UPL's recent strong play, what can a new contract possibly look like? Matthew, you're on your own for this one. I suck at forecasting contracts.
I'm not terrific at it either, but it depends. Do you want to go 3 years? 3 years, somewhere in the 3.5 to 4 per? Is that light right now? I don't know. Or do you go longer and make a bet on a goalie, which is always scary to do? I mean, I think 3 years is the way to go at the moment, and somewhere in that 3.5 to 4 doesn't bury you. Probably looking like closer to 4. Maybe
I think,
maybe it goes to a little bit over that if he keeps playing this well. He's been the best goalie in the league since January 1st. So, but you give 3 years gives you until Levi's basically hitting his prime, and then you have a lot more clarity on who both goalies are and how you want to allocate your resources. But they could end up in a situation where they're like Boston, right? Trying to figure out how to do the balancing act. That's the best case scenario, right?
I want
Luukkonen
two goalies.
Luukkonen becomes Ullmark and Levi becomes Swayman, and you're figuring out how to get the contracts to stack properly. So I think 3 years gives you a good chance to do that. I know that's there's a scary element of if he continues this path, then he's, able to be a UFA and his price is really going to go up. But the flip side of that is it's still a small window here where he's been an elite goalie. So going to the 7 or 8 year deal is equally as risky. So I'll be interested to see how they play it.
It's a lesser term deal. It's not a long-term deal. That's all I know. Dollars.
And Teddy asks, and they could give him a 1 year deal, right? A prove it deal, or they could also take him to arbitration, and let them decide it, which is what the Bruins did with Jeremy Swayman last year. So you can, there's a lot of options on the table, and that's when we will find out truly how much they believe this is for real, the sample size we've seen, because the money talks in that regard.
I like this question from Neil Kennington. If the Sabres are more than 10 points out on Friday, do you think Adams trades Yoki Haru since he's a right shot D? They're coveted, and he's a restricted free agent this summer. Or do you think Adams re-signs Henry? I have a take. I'll give you mine real fast because you have probably more insight on this. I don't think they look at Yoki Haru as part of a problem. I think they would have to be really wowed by an offer on Friday to move him at the deadline.
I agree, especially because he's an RFA. I don't think Kevin Adams is going to feel pressure or rushed into a deal with an RFA. He's focused a lot on those UFAs and making sure he, does right by them and gets, what he needs. The RFAs, I don't think they're in a rush. And he did bring up Henry Jokiharju when I asked if he felt like he still needed a top 4D, and he felt pretty good about what Jokiharju's shown, but said it was something they'd still evaluate in the summer. I think it's the same conversation as with Casey Middlestat, where if a guy's an RFA, Kevin Adams is in the business of trying to make a hockey trade. If he's moving out guys that are part of, the current roster, the core or the second layer of the core, and you're not going to make a hockey trade at the deadline, most likely.
No. Cash says, is Jack Quinn going to come back at some point this year? I think the plan was for him to come back. Whether or not they even throw him back out there when he's healthy, I guess remains to be seen. I think medically he should be healthy in time to play a couple games. Whether or not they will throw him in, we don't know. Matthew, thoughts on that?
Probably will depend on how far out they are, but my guess is, given how much development has been the focus, if he is healthy, they will want to get him on the ice feeling good heading into the summer. I think they will view that as important, and they will have a brief window to do it as long as he's 100%.
What is this? I can never say this, but it's a frequent commenter. Black LJs, I guess we'll go with. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Good points. This was about the replacing the contracts. It's not about replacing Okposo and Gergensons with a Rosine Kulik. It needs to be real fourth liners who hit, forecheck, and pitch in with some scoring. That's exactly where I'm going too, by the way. I think if you can get one of Rosane or Kulik up next year, great if they earn it. Same thing with Savoy, by the way. But just because I'm talking about using those contract slots that are currently occupied by primarily fourth liners. I mean, Akposo's played on every single line this year, I think. It's about using those contract slots. If you can go out and get a slot, it's not even about the dollars too, by the way. It's just using those 2 contracts that you have on your 23-man roster right now. You can get a second liner. You can get a third liner. You can bump a Greenway down if he's still here to your fourth line, where I still feel like he should be. I'll say it one more time and then I'm done on the Greenway as a fourth liner thing. But no, I think they got to get
It's been a first liner more
energy.
recently than he's been a fourth liner on this team.
It's pretty wild. I know.
And
he's kind of keeping up.
He's playing pretty well. I like him on the power play because he gives a little bit of a different mentality out there, it seems like, and he gets to the net, and he's been great on the penalty kill. Would like to see him be a bit more of an antagonizer than a guy that he plays good defense. He's willing to hit, but dragging the team into the fight doesn't seem to be his MO. He's there if you need him, but
he's reactive. We need proactivity.
Exactly. Compared to, you watch teams like the Panthers and you see it, right? You're like, that's what it looks like. That's the team that you can learn from.
Coda says Yakov Trenin is a perfect fourth liner in unrestricted free agency. Interesting thought. This is a player that, to me anyways, I think he's evolved into a different type of player than he was in junior. I want to say I saw him throwing fists even this year. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, but he's got some bite to his game for sure. And yeah, that's kind of an interesting one. That's a player that hasn't popped up on my radar yet. I haven't really looked at UFAs yet. Again, I think we have a lot to still get through with this season before you start sketching out what a UFA strategy can look like. I'm sure Matthew will probably write an article as like potential moves. Maybe mark that one down. That might not be a bad idea to draft off of what Coda is suggesting there.
I will
Bought
say
Chara twice. Yeah.
I think this of the commenters over at The Athletic and our commenters here on the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show, just always filling my notebook with excellent ideas. And I appreciate it. I appreciated all the feedback last night and this morning on the interview with Kevin Adams, and different ideas that people have in the comments of my stories. And I don't always have the bandwidth to be replying to everything, but it's something I've noticed about the hockey fans in this town, especially, are just the people who are locked into this team still after going on 13 years. They're sharp, and I appreciate it. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Follow the prospects too, by the way. Yeah, no, we got a good batch, man. We got a good batch, and there's more to get, by the way. Tell your friends, listeners, that the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show goes regular, and we can get this baby hopping. This is really funny. So Papa Duke writes, is Zach Benson trending into the skilled pest conversation? So I still write notes in anticipation of things that I want to throw out there at you, Matthew. We don't just fly all the time preform. And I wrote this week that Zach Benson is going to be a major pain in the ass to play against, not only with his quickness moving the puck, it's his quickness getting to the spot. I was on with Duffer on Wednesday. Marty was flying down to Florida, so I filled in for him, and we were talking a little bit about Benson. And I shared with Duffer that sometimes you can close your eyes and I can see where Zach Benson's going to be in 3 years, just with a little more man strength to him, maybe a little more thickness. I don't think he's going to be real stumpy or anything like that, but this year is all data, and he's already got this elite level processor. In 3 years, you could see him driving people nuts already at age 18. When he really has this league figured out, he's going to be kind of an unintentional prick. Like, he's a really nice kid, but I think he's going to be that guy that's going to drive teams nuts. I love that comment from Papa Duke. Matthew,
and he's got
thoughts on that?
He's going to score.
Oh, yeah.
That's the other thing. I don't want people to think that because the points aren't there that he will get lost in the shuffle for his top 6 potential, because I think he will score. But he will be one of those players that we talk about that is that is actually the perfect example of dragging your team into the fight, right? He's 18 years old. He's tiny, and he is doing that routinely by setting a certain tone to the point where he's getting called for all these penalties because he's playing a proactive game, right? He's playing an antagonistic game, and I he's getting picked on a little bit by the refs, but he's putting himself in position to be, you know, and getting mixed up with all the time. And so
Worst answer I ever gave on live television was to Duffer. He's like, "Why do you think he's getting called for these penalties?" I said, "I think it's just the refs flexing on an 18-year-old kid," and it's like such a bad answer, but I think it's the actual answer. I'll spend 10 seconds on this. Bakes, what's your favorite tequila? And you have to have a community event, meetup event, so I can get you your shot. So we will do something, by the way. My favorite, I like Casamigos, and I'm on this ghost tequila right now. It's made with ghost pepper. We should talk about that sometime. But yes, community event. We'll get to that. I think.
we've
Matthew and I are developing
conversations
something
about it.
Yep.
Some point in the off season over the summer, whether it's development camp or something like one of these events that, you know, we can plan ahead and hopefully get a lot of the people. That would be great. It would be really cool to meet some people in person and chat with people.
So I'm going to let you get ready to bounce. It's 6:36.
I have a couple I'm going to pull up
40
here.
minutes.
I'm going to
Go
pull
ahead.
up
Yeah.
this
Oh
one
yeah.
here.
We're going to go as long as you can. You're the one that has to work.
Interesting. If they move on from Okposo and Gergensons, then it'll be time to name Dahlin. Can you hear me still?
I think we lost you. Teddy writes, interesting if they move on from Okposo and Girgensons, then it'll be time to name Dahlin or Cousins captain, probably Dahlin. Matthew, we got you back.
Can you hear me?
I think we lost you.
Maybe it's your headphones.
Can you guys in the chat hear Matthew? I cannot.
They can still hear me. I think it's your headphones.
They can hear you. All right. So I lost you.
What I'm going to say about the captain situation is the reason I like the idea of moving on from Okposo or Girgensons at the deadline is it gives these guys some time to lead without Kyle in the room, right? It's hard to jump into a captain type role when the captain is still there. So I think in that regard, you want to give it some time to breathe, right? Don't trade Okposo at the deadline and throw the C right on Dahlin. Give it a little bit of time to breathe because you don't know what the locker room looks like without Okposo and Girgensons in there. When they're gone, there'll be a different dynamic naturally. And it's where I do think Tuck still has, you know, his qualities that could lead him to being a captain at some point. So just because he is the adult in the room, but Dahlin has certainly shown it on the ice. I would just be really curious, like our conversation about coaching, right? You got a coach in here, give him a chance to establish his systems, all these different things. You get Okposo out the door, it gives you a head start on figuring out what it looks like without him from a leadership standpoint. And I think that matters too, in the sense that they're in this weird spot in the standings. They're not really in it. But who is going to have a standard anyways, right? Who's going to try to establish a standard in that locker room? So I think that may be the biggest benefit to moving on from Kyle Okposo is not that he's been a bad captain, but it gives you a chance to see what these other guys look like as leaders. Everybody moves up a notch on the totem pole when Okposo leaves and gets forced into different roles. And maybe it's a little uncomfortable at first, but it gives them a head start instead of trying to get used to it in September.
Thanks for sticking with me there during that. I don't know. I have another computer running that's recording some games.
Baker routinely has headphone issues. That's why I was pretty confident that it might have been the headphones. So I'm glad that people could hear us.
I got smoke coming out of that other computer over there recording some games. I don't know what the hell's going on. So I hope I didn't fry it because I don't feel like whatever. We'll talk about that later. You got anything else you want to throw up?
Let's see. I think that was all I saw that caught my eye. So we did a pretty good job with the chat. Sometimes it's hard to keep up, but we do our best. We get to as much as we can, and I feel like we hit a pretty good chunk of it. If there's anything else you want to get to, toss it up there.
It's just one
But-
other one that Spike had earlier where he said it's kind of it's tied to what you just talked about with young guys moving up once you get rid of the current leadership, or they move on, I should say, not get rid. Spike's of the opinion that this group of young Sabres players beginning to mature as a group that's played together for a good number of years. A lot of them have, but I think, yeah, you're seeing it now. I still have some concerns though about the maturation. Like I think it was Alex Tuck's comments to you when he was talking about some of the guys maybe not realizing like the points at the beginning of the year count the same as the points at the end of the year.
I was
Like,
surprised to hear that.
You learn that in
surprised,
like Bantam and Pee Wee, dude.
Right. Well, it was a big talking point at the end of last year and into the beginning of this year, right? Was that they learned that because they had to play catch up at the end of the year. And I don't know, I guess some lessons take longer to sink in than others, but yeah, it's a tough spot to be in when you're Alex Tuck because you've learned all these lessons. You know all these things are important, and you can't force your experience on somebody else, right? It's going to happen when it happens. And I think to Michael's point, there's doing it together as a group. As long as you're pushing in the right direction and you have the right group, you get a good result at the end when guys have been through it together. But you got to plug the holes with the right guys. You got to get the right supporting talent around this core of young players to get them to the next level. And that's where some fresh faces and fresh voices from a leadership standpoint, there could be a guy wearing a letter next year that's not on the roster yet, right? Maybe there's that type of guy out there for you in free agency or via trade. Be open to that idea and be open to making some people in that room a little bit uncomfortable, I think is what needs to, they will, by virtue of their situation, be more uncomfortable next year, a lot of these guys. But
yeah,
I think that needs to be a mantra heading into the offseason. And I was somewhat encouraged that Kevin Adams mentioned at the top of our conversation about removing emotion a little bit, because I think that is a hard lesson to learn as a GM. I think it's why these experienced GMs, their second time around can have some success because they've already learned that, right? They've already been burned by the business enough to say, all right, I got to be cold and calculated. And I think Kevin is still learning that part of it.
That's a good way to end, Matthew. I don't want to throw anything else up. It's almost 1:45. I think it's time to end this bad boy. Thanks for hopping on. Go get yourself a cookie. Thanks for everyone for hopping in the chat. Always appreciated. Brian Cummings showed up. A little late to the party, Cummings. I didn't see you here earlier. He may have been on another podcast. He likes to do that. I like to give him a hard time.
Also, Kevin Adams was on the pregame radio show tonight. We were competing against Kevin Adams, and we still got a pretty good number of live viewers here. So I appreciate everybody that stuck with us and in favor of over the GM. That was pretty good.
Yeah, we love our listeners. Cummings didn't get his engraved invitation. He said, "That's on me. It is on me. I apologize." Hit the notification bell, Cummings. All right. I'm out of here. That's it. Thanks everyone again for hopping in. Sabres Jets tonight start in 17 minutes. Matthew, we'll do this again very soon. For Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic, for the production crew, having a very nice day outside. I'm Kris Baker. We'll see you next time.